All right. Today's class goes back to the idea of religion and magic. This is something that the early anthropologists were really interested in is religion and the relationship between religion and the idea of magic. And they basically assumed that there was a progression where you start off with magic stuff and boxing gloves and chants and goofy stuff. And then you develop religion, which would be more formalized. But in our society, then people have science. And this is not the way things are, but that's what people believed about how there was this evolutionary idea. And as these early anthropologists looked at other societies, and as basically people in the scientific Western world looked out, they wondered, well, are these people do they know what's going on in the world? Because there was the idea that people used magic or even religion for things just because they didn't understand the way things were. They didn't understand cause and effect. So there's a very famous example that Evans-Pritchard uses, and I'll show you about in a film clip in a second, but it also appears in Guest, which is Evans-Pritchard was an anthropologist. He was working among the Azande in Africa. And in this area of the world, they have granaries, or places where you store grain, which are on top of these wooden posts. And people would sit under these granaries for shade, but the posts would get eaten out by termites. And so every so often a granary would collapse and it might hurt somebody. And so the thing was, the people he talked to, when he said, why did that granary collapse? They would talk about witchcraft. And he's like, well, what are you talking about? The termites eat out the beams and then it collapses. And they're like, we know about the termites. We know all about that. But why was that person sitting under the granary and why did it collapse at that particular time? And so what they were saying is they knew about cause and effect, but they wanted to know something else about what was going on. So this is a classic example of looking at other societies. Familiar. All right. Exactly. Well, what do you think? A soothing voice? The soothing narrator. I think that's from the 1970s. I think the 1970s might have been the best time. Actually, it did remind me. So it took Evans-Pritchard 7 weeks to get to his field site, to the Sudan, the southern Sudan. How long do you think it would take to get there today? What'd you say? You can't get there from here. I'm just bringing this up because it's one of the ironies of globalization, this idea that we're all interconnected and can travel anywhere. Like, actually, there's all kinds of places we can't go. You just should not be going to the Sudan. It's actually one of the seriously most sad places right now. I'm thinking about this also with Haiti and so many anthropologists that did wonderful work in Haiti. You can't go there now. They just ended commercial flights. There's not a functioning government. So many of the places that we used to go to as anthropologists are just not even available anymore. But yeah, all right. What else? Soothing voice and oh yes, a soothing voice, and it doesn't have all the pixels. That's what happens on YouTube. I don't have the VCR DVD of this, so I'm relying on pixelated YouTube. So, what this illustrates, hopefully, is how something that seems strange, we in anthropology try to make it familiar. How these things that might seem odd to us at first may have a logic and a consistency. Because what do we want to watch out for when we see other societies? Being judgmental? Yeah. We want to not just dismiss them, thinking of lesser. So we have to always be careful when we talk about how other people are irrational or superstitious. And the whole idea that it's only when science doesn't explain something that's where the religion or magic comes in. By the way, what happens when these things don't work? Do we stop believing in them? No, we keep believing. Yeah, we keep eating the chicken, not those chickens that got poisoned. So as much as we know that the termites eat the posts out, and as much as we know that you got sick because of a virus, or you got sick because of a bacteria, we have all this science around, but science can't tell us the one thing that we really want to know. What we really want to know. We'd like to be able to control the outcome, and so we take our pills and do our things, but what if it doesn't always work? What do we want to know when something bad happens to us?
Why it happened?
Why? Why me? Why did I get this flu and that person didn't get the flu? Why am I suffering and that person isn't? This is something that science cannot answer. Yes, there's transmission and there's all these things, but ultimately these questions are beyond the scope of science. Why things happen? Why am I sick? Actually, this is a good lead up as we exit break. On the other side of this, we'll be reading Health, Illness, and the Body. You can contemplate these issues of why we're sick. So in some ways, what anthropology does for us, maybe the most, it might be said is one of the most important things that anthropology has done in the world is to take these societies or take these groups or take these beliefs that we might look down upon or think are weird or irrational, and to show that actually that's something that is probably very present in our own life as well. I also just mentioned that the way that anthropologists like Evans-Pritchard use the word witchcraft has nothing to do with the ways in which we think about witchcraft or Wiccan beliefs. And as you can see, they probably shouldn't have even used that word because they see it as a malevolent force that goes through people unconsciously. So it's not that anybody is consciously trying to use this force. So it's not exactly the same. The word witchcraft is a little strange to use in that situation, but anthropologically it's been used. So the other thing that anthropologists do, though, which is also important, is to take something that seems familiar and to show us that it is maybe strange, or that our own practices or the things that we do might not be as rational as we think. And one of the most famous illustrations of this, most classic articles, is this one that I gave you to read called Baseball Magic by George, I don't think that G is pronounced. I'm just going to say George Gmelch. A very famous article, been used in lots of different anthropology classes, but it's basically to illustrate how, on the one hand, you shouldn't be looking down on other societies, but on the other hand, our own ideas are not as rational or logical as they should be. You saw this before on your football team? Oh. What do they do? All sorts of stuff. Depending on the person. They all have their individual rituals to deal with this. So there's an interesting stuff going on here. There's the line between going through a routine and when it becomes a ritual and how that happens. One of the more, where do baseball players, where do they need magic and rituals the most? Yeah. Yeah, so they most rely on this for pitching and hitting. Why is that? Why do you need, well, maybe let's ask the other question. There's other parts of baseball where they don't bother with anything. You don't need any magic to deal with it.
Field.
In the field, in fielding.
They're like, well, they're gonna do amazing every time. Like it's based on their skill.
Fielding seems to be something that you can do pretty much on if you're good at it. If you're not like me and suck at it, I'd have to use magic all over the place. But if you're good at it, it's like autopilot, auto connect. But what happens in the hitting thing? What would we say? It's all luck. Well, it's certainly something that is hard to do, and it's like for anyone who's ever tried to swing against a major league pitcher, it's like you're just swinging at something and it might hit and it might not. And so in those cases where things seem out of your control, that's when you need the rituals, taboos, and fetishes to try and get things together. So it's again a really interesting idea. And as I said, as you're looking at your fieldwork visit, you might think about, would I want to take these people and make what they're doing that seems strange, make it more familiar? Or would I want to use the strategy of making something that seems so familiar and mundane and make it strange? And I'm not sure if I think in the 1970s and 80s, baseball players used to be more all-American. Nowadays, well, it was seen as like apple pie in America. I'm not talking about the actual origin of the players. It's just it was seen as the American sport. I don't. Yeah, it might be football. So I told you that this essay is pretty famous. I first encountered it. There's this book I used to use called Conformity and Conflict. Basically, strange familiar was their theme. So when I first started using it, this was like, I don't know, what are those? Football hooligans and Papua New Guinea tribesmen. So you take these people and you say, very similar. Or you take a guy on a motorbike and someone on a camel, and you say, pilgrimage or something like that. Or you take people at a rave, or probably back in, I don't know where we are there, some other culture. Yeah, maybe, who knows? So or you say a motorcycle gang, bikers, and I don't know, nuns. So this has been an ongoing theme in anthropology. Some people believe it's the definition of anthropology, to take what seems weird, make it seem familiar, or to take what seems normal to us and show us how bizarre it is. So that's fun.